Gold Star families of the 13 heroes killed in the botched Afghan withdrawal are defending President Trump's visit to Arlington Cemetery after Vice President Harris said on X this: Donald Trump's team chose to film a video there, resulting in an altercation with cemetery staff. Let me be clear. The former president disrespected sacred ground, all for the sake of a political stunt. But those families invited him, and they are not happy with the way the vice president is portraying the solemn event. Watch.
We wanted a leader. That explains why you and Joe didn't get a call.
President Trump has been there for us from the very beginning.
Vice President Harris, I ask you, why won't you return a call and explain to us how you call my daughter-in-law's death a success?
We had the woman judge who invited President Trump. She's one of the moms. She was on Newsroom today. Let's take a quick listen to her.
We are just so tired. I mean, we've been disrespected so much in the last 3 years. It's been 3 years. No response from them. Donald Trump, no, because he's been there for us. He's been our rock. He's been there for us to give us a little bit of peace and carry that grief with us for a little while. And that's what he did that day. It makes no sense that they throw daggers at us. It makes no sense they throw daggers at him, except for the fact that they weren't there.
Has Kamala Harris decided to protest too much?
Yes, I think she does protest too much, and I think that it's working against her. Look, there's, that you would not return a phone call from a mother whose daughter was killed in an attack that could have been prevented had the rules of engagement been clearer, had someone given the order, you can take the shot where no one's going to be injured other than the suicide bomber. But look, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the Gold Star families? Are you going to believe the angel mothers, like the mother of Jocelyn Nungary or the mother of Rachel Laken Riley, or Jonathan Diller's family? I mean, the people who lost so much and have no interest in politics whatsoever, when they speak and you juxtapose what they say against people who are in power and whose power and policies have literally contributed to or directly caused the death of your loss. I mean, this is a real easy choice to make. And in the end, this so-called, apparent altercation that took place at Arlington National Cemetery that Kamala's trying to twist into, Donald Trump, his team, he caused a real problem. You know what? If there was an altercation, get yourself an affidavit that's sworn to, file yourself some criminal charges, or shut the F up, because the families want you to shut the F up, and they're telling you, we don't want you. You haven't been there for us. You were not at the transfer of the caskets. You've never called us, and you don't answer our phone calls. What could be worse?
But she was the last person in the room, Greg.
Yes, exactly. And I find it interesting to see where the media directs their attention, where your attention should go. So what deserved attention? Trump at Arlington. What deserves attention? Kamala slamming him on X. But what doesn't deserve attention? The uniform response from the Gold Star families. I'm not sure people saw what they just saw on any other network. I looked for it. I couldn't find it. So this process of attention direction is instructing you how to think about the election. Don't you dare find out that Trump was invited and that the families wanted him there, or that Biden had exploited military photo ops more than anyone. He was at Arlington and talked about his politics as he declared that he was running for a re-election. This story deserved reverence, and I thought that we were showing reverence by not engaging in the media back and forth. We didn't discuss it. We didn't want to get in the slop, right? But then Kamala, fresh off her CNN catastrophe, agreed to tweet her 2 cents or have somebody tweet it for her. And that opened the gate, the Abbey gate. And now you can talk about her being the last person in the room to make the decision that led to these murders. She didn't engage with the family. She didn't show up. She then prioritized a hot take on Trump, but not the wishes of the families of the dead soldiers. She should have backed off the wine, stayed off of X, because she walked right into her past failures. And Willie Brown can't help her now. Oh, I'm not supposed to say Willie Brown.
You can say it.
Yeah, we spent 8 years talking about Trump's affairs. I think we can give Harris some credit in that arena, or it would be sexist.
So equal
right?
time.
I mean, and it would be racist too, because we're talking about what's her name, Stormy, we should also be talking about Kamala.
Okay, well, we can talk about that at some point.
Let's do an hour.
We'll keep talking about the Gold Star families at the moment.
Fox Nation special. I can smell it coming.
I wonder, Harold, if the vice president's team and the Democratic team did not expect the families to push back in defense of President Trump and in defense of their loved ones as much as they have.
I don't know. This story is unfortunate on a lot of levels. Two things, though, can be right. President Trump was right to accept the invitation of the parents of the fallen soldiers to attend the gravesite ceremony. And, Judge, I differ with you slightly. If President Trump and his team did not violate any rules there at the cemetery in terms of taking video, then they should just come forward and say exactly what happened. I think one of the more...
They have.
Well, have they owned up to the fact that they did take video? I think I heard the president today, President Trump, before we came on, said that he doesn't know anything about the video, and the only reason he was there is because of the families invited him.
But the issue that they're complaining about is that someone shoved someone working at the cemetery.
Right. So that could be right also. But both things would be wrong in filming the video. I think what we're distracting from are two things. One, the family's grief, and two, I shared last week, I still have not got a full accounting of what happened. I know I like a lessons learned exercise at all times to figure out what did they learn, what went wrong, and what have we done to make sure we do nothing like that again. I get the families. I won't criticize those families for saying their political views. They have every right to do that. But if President Trump and his team also were trying to film something and something else happened with the worker, they should come forward and take accountability for that as well.
That's what you just.
Well, wherever Donald Trump goes, he's being filmed. Just like wherever Biden goes, there's film crews there. Just like McCain was filmed there, just like other politicians, you've seen those things used in campaign ads. Now, in terms of the incident, there was no incident. From what I understand, a woman had a mental issue. And I don't know if it was TDS or it was something else, but it was handled and it was minor. And that was it. This is because MSNBC went buck wild because they have nothing else to cover. Because everything Trump does, they have to make a scandal. They made this a scandal for a week. Kamala, it was her campaign manager probably, decided to put out a release on it, and it blew up in her face. That's what happened. And so I feel bad for Trump. I feel even worse for these families who've now just had an open wound picked at by the Democrat nominee and MSNBC for an entire week. It's totally unacceptable. It should not have been a scandal at all. And I just hope we can get over it.
It's amazing. I got to reiterate this. The media covered the initial part of the story.
Yep.
And then there are the families, and they leapfrogged over the families and now are doing a different story about the same story.
Right.
They literally walked over.
There was
it.
there was no discussion about why the families were there in the first place.
Yes.
Okay.
And they have a huge problem with vets on the left. This campaign between Walz and Kamala and Abby Gate, huge problem, and this is not going to help.
I'm not sure
They think
you're
it's
right
helping
about
them.
something didn't happen.
This issue is not helping.
I know that but I'm telling you, I think that they think it's helping them with a small sliver, and that right now, if you're in the knife fight in a phone booth, the small sliver is
I
what you
want
need.
to be in a knife fight in the phone booth.
All right, let's go. See you after class. All right.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.